I would like to introduce our first speaker, William Swelbar, who holds many titles, one of which is the research engineer at MIT International Center for Air Transportation. Please join me in welcoming Mr. William Swelbar.
Good morning. And I'm going to start with wow. They told me there was going to be a lot of people here. This is really impressive. So I'm here to do what it is that people love to do, and that is to talk about the airline industry. It is a topic that everyone at a cocktail party has their own war story to tell. And when I go to cocktail parties, I don't tell anybody I am even remotely tied to the airline industry. So with that said, we're going to spend some time this morning taking a look at how it is that this industry has changed. And it has changed in a significant way, particularly in the last 10 years. I'm going to take a step back to when it is we deregulated the business, but honestly, the deregulation of this business, I think, has taken place in the last decade, not over the last 30 years. So we're going to take a look back, a look forward, and one of the things I wanted to do was to talk about the airline business in each of the 5 distinct business cycles that define the industry since it was deregulated. And what is it that people were saying during those respective business cycles? The first business cycle was from the fourth quarter of 1978 until the fourth quarter of 1982. And there was a man largely responsible for deregulating the business. His name was Dr. Alfred Kahn. And we should have taken a clue that this was going to be a nightmare when he said, "I really don't know one plane from the other. To me, they're just marginal costs with wings." Well, anytime we start to take a look at an industry where it is that if marginal revenue exceeds marginal cost, then I'm going to add capacity, it's how it is that you can manage to lose $62 billion since the economic experiment was undertaken. An absolutely staggering amount. Then we move to the next business cycle. And a very colorful man named Marty Shagru, who was the vice chairman at Pan Am World Airways, said if we went into the funeral business, people would stop dying. I do think that it defines the airline industry very, very nicely, because this was a very tumultuous time. There were lots of mergers going on. The beginning of bankruptcy after bankruptcy was taking place, and the industry was really just trying to find itself. Then in the next business cycle, a man who I consider my mentor, Dr. Mike Levine, kind of put it into good perspective. He said, this really isn't a business. It's not run like a business. It's not run like shareholders. It's run like a model railroad, where it is that all you want to do is make enough money to buy more equipment. And that is true. That's exactly what it is the industry did at the time, because if marginal revenue exceeded marginal cost, you added capacity. This has not been an investable business until about the last 4 years, and I think Warren Buffett probably said it best, that if a far-sighted capitalist had been president at Kitty Hawk, he would have done his successors a huge favor by shooting Orville down. And that was just only in 2008. And then I think as we sit in this business cycle, and whether it is we're at the peak, whether it is where we are in this business cycle, I'm not sure. Jeremy probably has a very good idea. But the fact is, it is a different industry. And I think Richard Anderson at Delta Airlines said it best, when this industry is no longer a hobby. And I think it was run like a hobby for a very, very long time. That's how it is that you can manage to lose large sums of money. If we think about how it is that this industry has changed, it really does have to do with the supply of seats that are being deployed. And historically, we added seats at a rate much greater than economic growth. And that proved to be a bit of a disaster. And if we think about it, it was very good for the consumer, absolutely terrific. Because if you take a look here, you take a look at what it is that you paid for a price of ticket, those are the lines, compared to the bars as to what the rate of inflation was. And if you think about this business, the business adjusted for inflation up until through 2010 probably inflation-adjusted fares were minus 55% since the industry was deregulated. Now, there's a lot of business people in this room, and I dare to say I don't think any of you would like to see your unit revenue adjusted for inflation down 55%, especially in a capital-intensive and labor-intensive business. The best thing that happened to this industry was that fuel went to $147 in July of 2008. It's where it is that finally the industry woke up and said, something has to change because it is absolutely not sustainable, and the price of fuel is the new norm. The price of fuel began to go up beginning in 2004, when historically between 78 and 2003, the price of a barrel of jet fuel in the wing was no more than $30 a barrel. It is a new day for the business, and that's why it is that they have had to remake themselves. This cycle is something different. We've now accepted the fact that $100 oil is the norm, and there is margin expansion. You have an industry that is actually marginally profitable. This industry gets excited about 4% margins. I'm thinking a lot of business people in this room are not too excited about 4% margins. They are at grocery stores, but given that this is so capital intensive, we're actually seeing a profitable industry begin to reinvest in itself, and that is a good thing, and something that there is finally some stability in the business. Now, with all of this said, this business has not been necessarily kind to air service around the country, and I think it's important that we think about that, because we know that economic development and air service development are inextricably tied. What it is that airlines bring to a local economy is significant, and air service is very, very important in that. One of the things that I don't know that I ever thought I would see in my career is the fact that 87% of the domestic industry is in the hands of 4 airlines today: American, Delta, United, and Southwest. It is absolutely staggering when you consider just how fragmented this industry was a decade ago, and the rapid consolidation of the industry that took place between 2008 and today. The historic relationship between the industry growth and GDP is broken. Is it a good thing? Probably. But what it is that I think it's important for all of us out there is, when is this industry going to begin to grow? When are the legacy carriers going to begin to grow? Where is that growth going to be? What is the future of the low-cost carriers like Southwest and JetBlue? And is Southwest ever going to return to growth? Because we used to know them as a carrier that grew 8 to 10% a year. Will that happen again? I think not. What is the future of the ultra-low-cost carriers, the Spirits, the Allegiants? That they're a very exciting and dynamic part of the industry today, and carriers that are certainly exhibiting the appetite for growth. Will there be a regional industry in caps? I don't need to tell the state of Kansas how reliant you are on airplanes that are configured at 50 seats and less. And this is a sector of the business we're going to talk about, because it is a sector of the business that is sure to change and is going to cause all of us to look inward and rethink what it is that the airline map might look like tomorrow. And so what does all this mean for airports and for passengers? If you take a look at this donut, and I did this chart actually 3 years ago, because I was standing in front of my class at MIT on the day that the cockpit voice recording tapes were released from the Colgan crash in Buffalo. And it's where it is that we realized that something big was going to take place, that there was going to be a tremendous oversight of this sector of the industry like never before, and sure enough, that happened. And there are a number of things that are at work today that are going to cause this sector of the industry to certainly change. On the operational side, the fact of the matter is that the price of fuel and the capital cost of an airplane suggests that no airplane smaller than 100 seats can be economically built. Not every market out there can support air service of 100 seats. So something is going to change for sure. On the strategic side, we're going to talk a lot about the carriers engaging in a practice called capacity discipline. And capacity discipline is just a nice way to say that supply is constrained relative to economic growth. And while it's good for the airlines, it's not necessarily good for the airports. We are beginning to see signs of a pilot shortage in the airline industry, and it's impacting the smallest of the small carriers out there, predominantly those that serve markets called within the Essential Air Service program, which is a program where it is the government subsidizes service to small communities. A company like Great Lakes and Silver, who fly predominantly turboprop airplanes, are having a difficult time attracting pilots with sufficient hours. And a lot of that has to do with legislation that was passed after the Colgan crash in Buffalo, which required that a pilot, to get an air transport pilot's license, needed 1,500 hours versus 250 hours prior to that. And then finally, we have this decision. We have $100 oil, which has certainly made this smaller airplane uneconomic. We have something called the 40,000 cycle decision as well. And what that simply means is when an airplane takes off and lands, it's a cycle. And the fuselage is under a lot of stress. It pressurizes, it depressurizes, and at some point that airplane needs to be totally rebuilt. What it is that the carriers are suggesting to me, and we'll hear about this from my panel mate in a little bit, our airline's going to go through that heavy maintenance check on the 50-seat airplane. And a lot of companies are telling me they will likely park the airplane before it is that they will go through that extensive maintenance check. So let's take a look at how capacity has changed in the national picture. Bill, this chart is a perfect mess. Why are you putting this up here? Well, basically, it just demonstrates the industry is just much more rational and controlling in its capacity today. And it really began pre-recession, the economic recession, and now today, post-recession. An industry that looks very, very different in how it is that it deploys capacity. Again, coming back to that point where the fuel shock caused the industry to look back, look inward, and decide that cutting capacity was probably the only way it could take enough fixed cost out of its business to become remotely profitable. And despite the fact that fuel is a lot less volatile today, and volatility in the price of fuel is as important to the airline business as the high cost of fuel, but what it is we're seeing is even as fuel is moderated, and we know today that the price of a barrel of oil is down significantly from where it was, the industry is still demonstrating no appetite to add capacity back into the system. Between 2007 and 2012, the industry cut 1.4 million departures from the domestic system. That's a staggering amount of capacity that came out, and certainly it has impacted airports of all sizes, whether large or very small. The airline industry and the economy have historically been inextricably linked, and this just demonstrates the fact that traffic and capacity move in concert with the economy typically. But today, when you take a look at the number of seats that are being deployed relative to the growth in the economy, something is very, very different. And seat supply is being constrained. And this is really what it is that probably has been, in addition to consolidation, is the piece that has given the airline industry the pricing traction and giving you the higher fares that you can talk to your neighbor about that you're paying today, certainly. If we think about this capacity discipline and seat rationalization, nearly 100 million seats have come out of the domestic system since 2009. And basically what that did is wipe out 20 years of capacity growth, as the industry today in terms of seats is the equivalent size of what it was in 1995. Very, very different. Who's growing? What's interesting is it is the low-cost carriers, the Southwest and the JetBlues, that are actually cutting capacity at a greater rate than are the legacy carriers. And then down there we see the ultra-low-cost carriers, and you can see just how small they are as a percent of the total industry. They are growing, but they're certainly not having tremendous impact on the overall growth or capacity change in the industry today. We'll skip right by that. Let's take a look at what's going on in Kansas. Wichita is kind of the exception and not the rule, in that over the last few years, Wichita has realized some real growth in seats and departures. This is a really nice trend to take a look at, because now I don't get to show this chart in very many places where it is that I speak. Normally the line goes the other way. And when you take a look at what's going on in Wichita relative to other mid-sized communities around you, your growth rate is much greater than those communities around you, which certainly suggests to me that the airline sees something here that they don't see in other places. And like I say many times, if you have a growth rate equal to the rate of economic growth, it's really good. This is exceptional as to what it is that this chart shows when you consider the rate of economic growth and the rate of capacity expansion going on here. We talked a lot about that small jet. This state is very much tied to the small jet, with 81% of its capacity or departures being flown by airplanes 50 seats and smaller. And this includes Wichita. So there is a lot at risk here, and a lot of things that are important to know and to understand, and will certainly have some impact on communities around the state. This takes a look, just your reliance on the jets and what's going on with capacity. When you look at it from a statewide perspective, it's a very different picture than what it is you see from a Wichita perspective. So some final thoughts before we move to the panel. This capacity discipline has created a bit of a prisoner's dilemma for the industry. We know that constraining capacity has helped the industry to get more healthy. But every carrier out there probably sees some opportunity to grow and to increase their market share. But then to increase the market share and add capacity means that there would be damage done to the revenue that's generated by the industry. So we really have an industry that is it is the absolute definition of a prisoner's dilemma for this business. Who's going to break the mold? Will someone break the mold? Doesn't necessarily have to be broken, but I've been in this business way too long to not be a cynic to say that somebody is going to move back to a market share mentality and break the mold that's been so successful over the last few years. So if we think about the 5 business cycles, in every prior business cycle, passenger load factors increased. You know that. You don't have many empty seats at certain times of the day. Hub and spoke systems came and went. The low-cost carriers became increasingly prevalent. And I do believe that over time, as the cost structures at the network carriers continue to increase, at some point it's going to be difficult for all 3 of the network carriers to stay in the domestic business. And so there will be another market share grab that will present itself from my view. In every prior business cycle, fares have trended downward, and certainly this business cycle, something very different is taking place. And also, in every prior business cycle except this one, small community access to the air transportation grid improved. And that is certainly a challenge today. So from a community perspective, from an economic development perspective, what's important out there when it comes to the new normal of air service development? Because air service development, again, economic development, very much tied. From a community perspective, what's important is to retain the service you have. Do whatever it's going to take to retain that service, and certainly it's a mixed picture at airports across the state of Kansas. You can enhance that service, And that is actually taking place at Wichita and other airports today, where it is that we're seeing bigger airplanes come to your market. That's a sign that the airline industry recognizes that there is something good going on in that local economy, and they're willing to commit a piece of equipment that costs them $40 to $60 million to buy. And then finally, you want to expand it. But what's really important is first is that you retain it. You do the unsexy thing of enhancing it, then you think about expanding it. Because right today, what capacity discipline is really all about is that we're playing a zero-sum game. And if Wichita wants, or Hayes wants another service, they're going to have to demonstrate that the service that they're proposing is more profitable than another segment that's being flown in that carrier's network on some other part of its system. It's all about profitability. That's really moved the needle. Again, it's not a hobby. It's not about marginal revenue exceeding marginal costs. It's based on a business today that's all about fully allocated costs, and every airline route on every segment needs to be profitable on a standalone basis. I look forward to your questions. That ends my formal remarks. Thank you.